Chapter 18. It took a few minutes searching, but Wedge finally found the others at a small open air tap cafe half a block down from the space traffic registration office. There you are, he said, a little accusingly as he dropped into the third seat at the table. What's the problem? Miranda asked, sipping at the pale blue green liquor that she'd been her constant tap cafe companion ever since they'd met her. I told you we'd be down the street here. You're right. I should have guessed where exactly down the street you meant, Wedge countered, throwing a sour look at her drink. Aren't you starting a little early in the day? What, this? Miranda asked, lifting the glass and turning it this way and that in the morning sunlight. This is nothing. Anyway, you wouldn't be so heartless as to deny an old woman one of the last remaining pleasures of her declining years, would you? That old woman excuse is starting to wear a little thin. Wedge shifted his attention to Corin and the aromatic mug he was cradling. And what's your excuse? Corin shrugged. I'm just keeping her company. I take it that the incoming ship search went badly? It didn't go at all, Wedge growled, glaring at Corin's mug. Now that he thought about it, a drink actually sounded pretty good. But after that rather self-righteous tirade, he could hardly beckon a droid over and order her something himself. There was a movement at his side, and a mechanical hand set a mug down on the table in front of him, spilling a few drops first in the ancient annoying Bothan custom. What's this? He asked. We ordered it when we saw you coming down the street, Miranda said. Figured that after dealing with Bothan bureaucracy, you'd want something a little stronger than hot chocolate. Wedge grimaced. So much for the grand mystique of command. Thanks, he said, taking a sip. So what happened? Miranda asked. They wouldn't let you look at the records for incoming ships? Not without 15 forms of authorization, Wedge told her. It's crazy. Doubly crazy given that everything on those lists is technically a matter of public record. If I wanted to sit at the spaceport and write down the names of every ship as it came in, I could do it. They're getting nervous, Corin murmured, swirling his mug. Worried that vengeance might start taking potshots at their best customers. Whatever. There's no point in kicking against a bureaucracy, Miranda said. Let's think this through logically. Wedge waved a hand in invitation. We're listening. All right. Miranda took a sip of her drink. I think we can all agree that if someone is after the Drev'Starn shield generator, a frontal assault is out. Unless they brought a portable proton torpedo launcher with them. That building is far too well protected. Which means they'll have to rely on subterfuge, Corin agreed. Fairly obvious so far. Don't rush me, Miranda admonished him. Now, we can also assume they won't be able to suborn any of the techs or other people who work inside. But how about planning something on one of them? You mean like a bomb? Wedge asked doubtfully. I doubt it. That's a big area down there. Any bomb strong enough to do any serious damage would be easily detected. Besides, if they have any brains at all, they have the workers change clothes before they go into the actual generator areas, Corin added. That also protects against spy monitors being slipped onto anyone. So the workers are out, Miranda said. What about the various underground conduits that bring in power and water? There aren't any water conduits, Wedge said thoughtfully. Water and food are supposedly brought in from outside and triple scanned for contaminants. He looked at Corin. Power, though, is another matter entirely. You might be onto something, Corin agreed, frowning as he drummed his fingers softly on the table. Each shield generator is supposed to have its own self-contained power supply, but it's referred to as a backup supply, which implies the primary power source comes in from the outside. Where are you getting all of this stuff from, by the way? Miranda asked. Not Bothan propaganda, I hope. No, we pulled it from New Republic military files, Wedge told her. Unfortunately, what we had was a little skimpy on details. Typical Bothan paranoiac closed-mouthedness, Miranda grunted. I don't suppose you'd have any idea where exactly the conduits are located. Not even a guess, Wedge told her. Well, that's our second order of business then, Miranda said. Getting the complete schematics of that building. Corin cocked an eyebrow. I hope you're not expecting the Bothans to just give them to us. Miranda snorted. Of course not, she said. That's why it's our second order of business. We can't very well go visit the construction records building during the day. Wedge exchanged looks with Corin. The building's only open during the day, he pointed out carefully. That's right, Miranda said, smiling encouragingly. You catch on fast. Wedge looked at Corin again. Corin? The other made a face, but then he shrugged. We do have our orders, he reminded Wedge. And this isn't just to protect the Bothans, remember? I suppose, Wedge said reluctantly. So much for the mystique of command. So much for command at all. Still, Miranda was making sense, unfortunately. So if that's the second order of business, what's the first? I thought we'd go pull the records for the last day's worth of outgoing transmissions, Miranda said. If Vengeance is plotting something, their group here probably has to report in every now and again. Wedge felt his mouth drop open. You want to go check message traffic? Do you have any idea how much of that there is from this planet? That's exactly why they won't worry about it, Miranda said cheerfully. They'll figure no one would be crazy enough to bother sifting through all of it. Present company accepted, obviously. Well, of course. Miranda held up a hand. Now wait a minute. It's not as bad as it sounds. We can cut out all transmissions from major or established corporations. Even if one of them was involved, they wouldn't send out anything under their own name. We can also cut out any non-encrypted messages. We can cut out any message over, say, 50 words. That ought to give us something manageable. Wedge frowned. Why everything over 50 words? The shorter the message, the harder it is to decrypt, Corn explained, sounding as dubious as Wedge felt. One of the things I learned in Corsac. My question is, if we aren't going to be able to read it, why bother looking for it in the first place? To find out where it's going, of course, Miranda said, draining the last of her liqueur. The guys at this end can be as cagey as they want, but if they've got a sloppy contact down the line, we can still nail them. All we need is a likely system, and I can call Card's people down on them from that end. It still sounds crazy, Wedge declared, looking at Corin. What do you think? It's no crazier than breaking into the construction records building after hours, Corin pointed out. Thanks for the reminder, Wedge sighed. Sure, let's give it a try. I just hope the computer on our shuttle is up for a job like this. If not, the one on my ship can handle it, Miranda assured him, getting to her feet. Come on, let's get moving. Captain? Nalgul turned away from the unremitting blackness hanging in front of the Imperial Star Destroyer Tyrannic. Yes? Relay spark from the strike team, sir, Intelligence Chief Oyson said, coming to a parade ground halt and handing the captain a datapad. I'm afraid you're not going to like it. Really, Nalgul said, giving Oyson a long, hard look as he took the datapad. Given the Tyrannic's blindness out here, it was unarguably nice to receive these brief reports from the Imperial Intelligence Strike Team on the Bathawui surface. But on the other hand, any secret transmissions, even an innocuous one sent to an unobtrusive relay buoy, simply gave the enemy one more handle to latch onto. And for that potentially dangerous transmission to contain bad news. The message was, as always, brief. Now 10 days to completion of Flashpoint. We'll keep timetable updated. 10 days? Nalgul transferred his glare from the datapad to Oyson. What is this 10 days nonsense? The report 2 days ago said it would only be 6 days. I don't know, sir, Oyson said. All messages to us have to be kept short. Yes, I know, Nalgul cut him off, glowering at the datapad again. 10 more days in this clatarded blindness. Just exactly what the crew of this twitchy ship needed. They just blazing well better be keeping Bastion better informed than they are us. I'm sure they are, Captain Oyson said. Paradoxically, perhaps, it's much safer to send out a long transmission on a commercial frequency via the holonet than it is to send a short-range spark to us out here. I'm fairly well versed in communications theory, thank you, Nalgul said icily. A prudent man, he reflected darkly, would have found a way to beat a hasty retreat after delivering news like this. Either Oyson wasn't as prudent as Nalgul had always assumed, or he was twitchy enough himself to be spoiling for a fight with his captain. Or else this was part of a private evaluation of his captain's mental state, and much as he would like to deny it, Nalgal had to admit this idleness and isolation were getting on his nerves too. I was simply concerned that the delay not upset Bastion's master plans, he told the other, forcing calmness into his voice. I also wish I knew how in blazes they could lose a whole 6 days out of a 2-month timetable. Oyson shrugged. Without knowing exactly what their job is down there, I can't even hazard a guess, he said reasonably. As it is, we'll just have to rely on their judgment. He lifted his eyebrows slightly. And on Grand Admiral Thrawn's own genius, of course. Of course, Nalgal murmured. The question is whether all those armed hotheads around Bathawui will be able to hold off another 10 days before they start shooting. What's the warship count up to, anyway? The latest probe ship report is in that file, Sir, Oyson said, nodding towards the datapad. But I believe the current number is 112. 112, Nalgal echoed, frowning as he pulled up the report. There it was, 112. This can't be right, he insisted. It is, Sir, Oyson assured him. 31 new warships have come in, apparently all in the past 10 hours. Nalgal scanned the list. A nicely matched set, too. 14 pro-Bothan Diamolan and Defarian ships to 17 anti-Bothan Ashori ships. This is unbelievable, he said, shaking his head. Don't these aliens have anything better to do? Oyson snorted under his breath. From the news reports the probe ships have been bringing in, it's only because most of the New Republic does have better things to do that we haven't been buried by 3 times as many ships, he said. But don't worry. I have faith in the New Republic's diplomatic corps. I'm sure they'll keep things calm until we're ready to move. I hope so, Nalgal said softly, turning to gaze out at the blackness again. Because after all this waiting, if he didn't get a clear shot at this alien-loving rebel scum, he was going to be very angry. Very angry indeed. The annoyingly cheery door chime of the Exoticalia Pet Emporium rang, and Navit stepped in through the back room doorway to see Cliff close the door behind him. Business is booming, I see, he commented, glancing around the customer-free store as he walked between the rows of caged animals to the service counter. Just the way I like it, Navit said, leaning an elbow on the counter and gesturing the other to a chair. You get those messages off? Yeah. Cliff circled behind him and dropped into one of the seats. But I don't think any of them are going to like it. Navit shrugged. They could join the club. It's going to be awkward for us too, you know. We're going to have to delay the delivery date for those 3 Mokrams, but there's not a lot any of us can do about it. It was the Bothans' idea to start keeping their techs locked in on the shield building for 6 days at a time, not ours. Yeah, Cliff said heavily. I suppose we can't be expected to send our little time bombs in with the next shift any earlier than the next shift goes on duty. Don't worry about it, Navit soothed him. Our cover is plenty secure, and it won't hurt Horvik and Penson to wash dishes for the Hodin a while longer. We can hover an extra 6 days without any trouble. Maybe not, Cliff said darkly. Guess who I spotted at the comm center while I was checking for messages? Navit felt his eyes narrow. Not our 2 new rep military types. In the skin and twice as pompous, Cliff nodded. And they had company. Some old woman in a hooded cloak who seemed to know her way around better than they did. A fringe type, no doubt about it. Navit scratched his cheek. You think she's the one who got their wallet back from the Bothan lifters? Well, they had their wallets with them, Cliff said, so I'd say yeah, she's probably the one. New rep military types with a fringe lifter. Interesting. Were they picking up or delivering? Neither, Cliff told him. They were pulling a list of all outgoing transmissions for the past 5 days. Interesting, Navit said, drumming his fingers gently on the countertop. Analysis? They're on to us, Cliff growled. Or at least they know someone's here. He lifted an eyebrow. And they suspect it has to do with the Drev'Starn shield generator, or they wouldn't have spent so much time hanging around there. Recommendation. We vape them, Cliff said bluntly. Tonight. Navid shifted his eyes past him to the display window across the store, gazing at the hundreds of pedestrians and dozens of vehicles hurrying past. Drev'Starn was an immensely busy city, made all the more frantic by the presence of those warships overhead. Humans and aliens rushing around all over the place. No, he said slowly. No, they're not onto us. Not yet. They suspect something is in the works, but they don't know for sure. No, our best plan right now is to lay low and not let them draw us out. Cliff's lips puckered, but he nodded reluctantly. I still don't like it, but you're the boss. Maybe all they're trying to do is get a handle on vengeance, and they're not going to look for a group that big in a little pet store. Good point, Navitt agreed. We could even consider staging another riot for their benefit if they seem to be getting too close. If you're up to another performance, that is. Cliff shrugged. 2 riots on Bothawui might be pushing our luck, he said. But I can get one going if we have to. Across the room, one of the animals squawked twice and then fell silent again. Probably one of the pregnant mock wrens, Navitt decided, muttering in her sleep. He'd better get those injections started if he didn't want a mess of tiny lizards running around underfoot 6 days before he needed them. I just wish we knew who our opponents were, he commented. Maybe we can find out, Cliff said, pulling out a data pad. I followed them back to the spaceport in their ship. A surplus Sidon MBX-BR pacifier, as it turns out. Navitt grimaced. The pacifier had been the Empire's scout vehicle of choice, able to seek out new worlds and deliver a devastating pounding to them if it proved necessary. Considered by the New Republic to be too provocative for the delicate sensitivities of frightened primitives, their use had been summarily discontinued. Just one more reminder, if he needed it, of how badly things had been falling apart since Endor. You get a name? And a registration code, Cliff said, handing him the datapad. It's the woman's ship, unfortunately. She was the one who unlocked it. But we might still be able to back-check them through it. Excellent, Navitt said as he took the datapad. The Fingertip Express, eh? Sounds like a lifter's ship, all right. A smart-mouth name for a smart-mouth lifter. He handed the datapad back. There should be a Bureau of Ships and Services office somewhere in Drev'Starn. Find it and see what you can pull up. Aha, Miranda said from her ship's tiny computer alcove. Well, well, well. Sitting in the lounge just off the alcove, Wedge turned his eyes away from the expensive contour sculpt on the wall in front of him, and his thoughts away from the contemplation of how Miranda might have come into possession of such a prize. You found something? He asked. Could be, Corin said. Arms crossed and leaning against the wall, he'd been watching over Miranda's shoulder for the past 2 hours. 3 messages, all short and encrypted, have gone out in the past 5 days. He looked over at Wedge. The last one just this morning. What time this morning? Wedge asked, getting to his feet and crossing to the others. About 10 minutes before we got there, Miranda said, peering at the display. I guess we shouldn't have lingered over that drink. Too bad. Wedge grimaced, a bad taste in his mouth. Too bad wasn't the half of it. With Corin and his Jedi skills along, they might actually have been able to identify and tag the sender if they'd been there in time. If. Where were the transmissions headed? Towards Islami sector, Miranda said. Specifically in the direction of the Islami 3 Holonet relay station. Wedge suppressed a sigh. In other words, a dead end. Looks like it. Still, if they've already sent 3 messages, they might send more, Corin pointed out. His voice was calm and controlled, without any trace of the frustration and disappointment Wedge knew he must also be feeling over their near miss. If worst comes to worst, we could always stake out the place. A waste of time, Miranda sniffed. If they've got any brains at all, they'll spot a loiterer upwind from 60 paces away with their eyes closed. That depends on how the loitering is done, Corin countered stiffly. And on who's doing it. What, you? Miranda scoffed, looking him up and down. Right. Like you wouldn't stand out like a stormtrooper at an Ewok roast. I thought it was like a Wookiee at an Augury family reunion. No, no, you're versatile enough to do both. Oh, thank you, Corin growled. Thank you very much. Both of you simmer down, Wedge interrupted sternly. Corin's right, Miranda. He's exceptionally good at stakeouts. However, Miranda's right too, Corin. We don't have the time or the troops to cover all outgoing transmissions, even if we were sure they'd use the same center again. At least we now know for sure that someone's operating here, Miranda offered. That's something. Not much, though, Corin muttered. It occurs to me, though, Wedge said, raising his voice, that there's still one route we haven't tried. Assuming vengeance isn't homegrown, and considering its anti-Bothan sentiment, I think we can assume that, they'll have to have found some place local to set up shop. Question. Where? Miranda snapped her fingers. A business. Has to be some kind of business. She's right, Corin agreed, his frustration and miffed professional pride suddenly forgotten. An apartment wouldn't work. Too risky to have lots of people coming and going at odd hours. With a business, you can always cover it as deliveries or cleanup crews. And working for someone else doesn't give you enough privacy when you need it, Miranda added. And it'll have to be something fairly recently set up, and probably as close to the shield generator building as they can get. My thoughts exactly, Wedge said. And since we can't hit the construction records building until later anyway, what are we waiting for? Corin demanded, detaching himself from the wall and heading for the hatchway. Someone in Drev'Starn must have a list of all new businesses. Let's go find him. That's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.